Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our Matchmaker session today. My name is Hannah Elgersma, and I'm the project coordinator for City Lab Hamilton. Matchmaker events are where we learn more about the projects that have been submitted by staff members, and we work with our faculty members to try and find good student, faculty, and staff partnerships to tackle these projects. So today we're joined by Michelle Martin, Manager of Accessible Transportation Services for the City of Hamilton. And they'll be bringing us a project to understand what are the barriers, what are other barriers impacting accessible transit, pickup and drop-offs, and how can they be addressed through planning and design? And so, Michelle, as we get started, could you start by telling us about your role at the city and how that work impacts Hamiltonians?
So, Accessible Transportation Services manages the service. We are responsible under the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation 19111, to provide a specialized transit for eligible individuals that parallels the service provided on conventional transit, or HSR. So the role of ATS is to determine eligibility for service, to set up and maintain client profiles, to ensure safe delivery of service, and we are responsible for the customer-facing function, that is answering questions about the service and eligibility for the service, and addressing complaints and incidents as they arise on the service. Our vendor for service, which is currently the contractor DARTS, is a nonprofit that has been the sole vendor for the service since I don't know, in the 80s, before the megacity, when it was the region of Hamilton Wentworth. They provide on-street service and the functions related to on-street service, including reservations and dispatch, and also trip delivery. They also contract to 3 different subcontractors currently. And that's about it, really. The role of specialized transit is to make sure that people who have a disability and functionally cannot use conventional service have access to the transit that they require to go about all daily activities.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. So just to jump back a second and tell us a little bit more just about your role particularly.
My role specifically. Okay,
yeah.
Sure. So
yeah.
I'm a member of the transit leadership team as a manager. I report to the director of transit, that's Maureen Cousin-Heath, and she reports to the general manager of public works. Reporting to me is a supervisor, and reporting to the supervisor are 5 customer care representatives who look after determining the eligibility and the customer facing roles. And the ATS supervisor is responsible for referrals to third party to determine eligibility and overall quality and oversight of determinations, and following up on escalated issues. So I also have a senior project manager who reports to me, and he is responsible for contract management. And I have a project manager who reports to the SPM, who is responsible for KPIs, generally speaking, and other duties as assigned, but overall reporting of KPIs that we report quarterly to the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities and Public Works Committee.
Thank you. That's a great overview of your department, as well as yourself. So tell us a little bit about this challenge and how you got to submitting this challenge, and some relevant background information there.
Well, you know, there are incidents that arise where driver supervisors from the vendor, from DARTS, have to go out to a location to determine the best place for pickup or drop off at a point of access that is complicated for some reason, right? There is a barrier to access. There might be a line of sight issue where there is, you know, the driver has to keep the vehicle in sight at all times because of other vulnerable individuals on board the vehicle. So if there's a pickup or drop off at, the example there would be, you know, the townhouse development where the point of access is fully in the development, but there's no place to locate the vehicle, and the vehicle has to be outside the development for the driver to walk to the point of access, means the vehicle is out of sight. So that we have to address those on a case-by-case basis. We're usually putting in individualized comments in the client profile or in a location profile if it's a location that's frequented by a lot of our clients. You know, and it was raised in light of the fact that often what happens in these situations is either a missed trip, like the pickup wasn't made because the operator can't locate the individual, like, and the individual was waiting, thought they were waiting in the right place, or the individual is no-showed. We call that no-showed, like the driver marks that they weren't there at what we understood was the agreed upon point of access. So it was raised in the context of an ACPD meeting by one of the ACPD members. She was wondering what the impact of built environment was on these pickups and drop-offs. And I thought, well, that's something I don't have time to look at, but I think that is worth examining and thinking about, even in terms of what best practices are in place and how these things are addressed as one-offs. It's just because it does impact service delivery, right? And I think when, you know, people are talking about city building, right, they're not necessarily thinking, when they think of transit, they're thinking of bus stops. When they're thinking of specialized transit, they have one scenario in their mind, and that is a person who is being pushed in a wheelchair by an operator who's fully responsible for operating the mobility device. What they don't have in their mind is a person with a walker, because that is their mobility device, right? They may be relatively frail, but their OT has decided that they're capable, and it's the best thing for them to be as active as they possibly can using the appropriate mobility device. But that might mean that they take a little longer to walk, right? That you can't assume that they can cross a road. So when I've gone and said, you know, there's an issue with the point of access, and the response I get is, well, Dart's operator can just park across the street. And I'll say, no, they cannot, because they cannot, they don't take people across intersections, because we have people who can't walk quickly enough, right, to do that safely. So that's one aspect of it. People aren't thinking about all of the various types of disabilities and the barriers that might be present for a person getting from the vehicle to the point of access. The other thing they're not thinking about is that every single location in the city is a potential paratransit drop-off or pickup location. Any business, any residence, any apartment building, any medical arts building, any location is a potential pickup or drop-off location. And that complicates things quite a bit. So, yeah, so that's why it is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you're raising this challenge. So in terms of research, what kind of research would you be interested in students doing on this particular subject? And do you see it as more primary or secondary research as well?
Well, can you define what you mean by primary and secondary?
Yeah, absolutely.
In this context, thank you.
In this context, I was thinking, like, is it going to locations and actually scoping those spots out, the points of access, or more broadly, like the different possible scenarios that may come up?
Well, I think what I'm thinking about is what we need to think about in terms of new builds, right? What recommendations there might be for new builds or renovations. You know, I recognize we can't address every, you know, Victorian row house in Corkdown with 6 steps going up. Like, that's not, we would always continue to deal with those on a case-by-case basis. But I think it's worth thinking about specs for new builds in terms of accounting for paratransit pickup and drop off.
And when you
especially residential builds, I think. Yeah,
I was going to ask what kind of new builds you're
planning. But also anything sort of institutional, educational institutions, medical, you know, businesses generally, right? Because
Mhm.
anybody, you know, who's 65 and has arthritis and a walker may need to go to a store, right?
Yeah.
So if it's a new build, what are we looking at? And what's
Um,
possible and reasonable, right?
mhm.
Because it's not always in the business plan. It's not always, you know, I recognize also there's expenses to these things. There are costs involved. So
Um, and I don't know exactly how it works, so excuse my ignorance, but is that something that you'd be looking towards, like making policy changes for like, and that could be given when people are building or are looking at their parking lots and how to improve their infrastructure. That's something you're looking at, like how could new builds happen, and what kind of renovations, and how could that be applied to these different settings?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Bearing in mind sort of what the needs are of paratransit, right?
Yeah,
Bearing in
yeah.
mind that sometimes the vehicle ramps come out the side, sometimes they come out the rear. We can address that, some of that stuff with a vehicle type exclusion.
Mhm.
Um, but that also complicates scheduling for us,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
that means trips are denied because we don't have the vehicle type that the person needs to accomplish the trip, right? We
Mhm.
don't have it available, right? So,
Mhm. So one issue you're bringing up is the location, and like the point of access, and then another one is like what vehicle is available for pickup, and how to
yes.
match that with the people who need a certain
Mhm.
kind of vehicle.
Yeah, and that complicates scheduling, especially because the scheduling software we use is dynamic. So it
Mhm.
does move trips from vehicle to vehicle in order to accomplish the trip while meeting the service standard. There's a service standard of a pickup window, no earlier than 15 minutes before or 15 minutes past the negotiated pickup time,
Mhm.
and a maximum of 1 hour on board.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, it can be complicated.
Um,
Not easy.
Absolutely. So, what would you expect that the work that the students do where would you expect it to go exactly? I think we kind of have an idea, but for
Well,
your team in particular.
sure.
Yeah,
I think we would like, you know, a sort of a
yeah.
summary of what recommendations might be. And I think Mike Field would be interested in that as well, from
Mhm.
roads. Um, I think also, and I haven't looped in planning and dev, but I think that would be, you know, interesting, an
Mhm.
interesting report to bring forward to say, to my colleagues and say, here, these are, you know, we had this work done by City Lab and these are some of the considerations. Some of them obviously go to roads, right? For
Mhm.
sidewalks and bump outs and where the bump outs are and all of that. But probably these are recommendations that can be provided to builders, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know about codifying, that's a whole nother thing. but just in terms of what it should look like in order for ease of paratransit pickup and drop off. We also
Yeah.
have issues where operators have to exit their alight from their vehicle in traffic, right? Like they get out because they're in the curb lane and sometimes the road's
Mhm.
busy, right? Main Street, for example.
Yeah.
You know, what can we do there, for example,
Yeah,
to address
absolutely.
that? Yeah.
And so what kind of deliverables would you be looking for this project?
I don't know. What do you think is a reasonable deliverable? I mean, I just kind of threw it out there and
Yeah.
thought, let's see what they think. It
Yeah.
might be, you know, something
Y-
that can be done.
Yeah, I think that's something we can continue to discuss. The like very likely research and analysis on the current state and then recommendations will be part of it. So some
Yeah.
sort of report. But kind of scoping down that to make it feasible for a student class is what we're gonna try and help you with. And then before we get into that, is there anything else you would like to add about this project?
Um, I think it, what we're looking for is to sort of make sure that we can meet the needs of people with disabilities as
Mhm.
much as possible,
Mhm.
recognizing that it's not always possible, you know,
Mhm.
given what the location looks like. You know, we do have the AODA, of course, has standards for built environment. They've got standards for our provision of transit. They've got requirements, you know, regarding whether or not buildings or locations have to be retrofitted, you know, all of that kind of thing. But, you know, personally, I feel like we need to really look at the AODA as the minimum standard, right? And if we can do better, then we should try to do better. Recognize it's not always possible, right? And that's why the standard was set as it is. So that's kind of my thinking. And just because I know, you know, how many times we have to go in and put comments on locations, how many times we have a driver incident report regarding the point of access at a location, you know, how many times DARTS has raised with me the concern about dropping off for drivers dropping off in the curb lane on busy roads. You know, and even there, because of the way the trips were configured inside of the vehicle, if the person has to alight from the rear ramp and they're in the curb lane, that's a little hair raising, right?
Mhm.
And we have people who maybe they're using their power chair super confidently and very well. And then over time, their condition deteriorates. And then the day comes where they're not really managing it, you know, and that comes to me as an incident report. And I follow up the caregiver and I go, you know, really, they need to have somebody with them, or you're going to switch them to a manual chair, but this was not safe. I saw the video, right? My nightmare is that happening in the
Mhm.
curb lane from the rear ramp, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just on that note, you reminded me, is there like how do you collect a lot of the feedback that you get? Is that that's directly
Comes to us.
sent to your customer service team?
Yeah, it comes to the customer service team as a complaint from a client, or it comes to us as a driver generated incident.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And is that all, like, is that by phone? Is that emails?
It's we receive complaints by email, by phone,
Mhm.
by
Okay.
letter sometimes.
Mhm.
And we receive driver generated incidents from DARTS as a
Mhm.
scanned document, like they're handwritten. And
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
Okay. And is that research, would that be, is that like kept in files? Is that something that the students could use and analyze by chance?
it's client specific.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I can probably you know, there would be a couple of ways to approach it. I mean, I could pull a report for the complaint category of pickup and drop off or no shows or missed trip and see how many of those are point of access issues. I can pull
Mhm.
from the tracking spreadsheet of incidents, which ones were also point of access issues. However, if I went to my team, they could probably tell me, well, here's an example of this location, and here's an
Yeah.
example, because they're the ones who hear it all day long. I
Mhm.
don't necessarily. I just sort of look at the stats, or if something's escalated to me, then I'm involved.
Yeah.
And we could approach it that way with a couple of key examples and blind the information, right? We'd still have to have a proper privacy impact,
Yeah, absolutely.
whatever we did
Agreement.
for the other one. Yeah, an agreement. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and bringing this forward, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.